Hello, class. We made it through pretty much the end of Module B. So, a couple comments that I want to leave you with. Um, First of all, in this module, we looked at Chapter 5, which is elasticity, and Module 6, which talks about government actions and how they interfere with supply and demand equilibrium. You know, I recommended that you look at both chapters, but that you may actually choose to read chapter 6 before chapter 5. It didn't matter to me which way you did it. If you wanted to do it 5 and 6, either way is fine. Couple concluding remarks. Okay, in chapter 5, when we talk about the elasticity, what is important to know here is that looking at a graph is not nearly as easy as the book might imply that it would be. Okay? At the same point, steeper and flatter, okay, would be an indication as to whether the demand at that point are more elastic or less elastic. Okay. When we get to the two extreme points, and it's only at the real two extreme points where we have a straight line that goes straight up and down, or if we get a line that is straight horizontal, that we can talk about uh, the market having zero elasticity, being purely um, uh, not elastic. Inelastic would be, I guess, purely inelastic, or perfectly elastic, right? If we are talking about a line that is horizontal or something very, very, very close to it, a small change in price is going to have a huge, 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 huge impact on the amount sold. Okay. We typically, or the amount bought, we typically think of this in terms of pure competition. Okay. If you are producing a product, okay, and you are trying to sell it for a price that is higher than the going market price, you will sell zero. If you undercut the current price in a purely competitive market, okay, if you are a farmer and you are selling your grain for even a penny less than other farmers are selling their product, then you can sell as much as you possibly can. Right. So we have those excuses. The other thing is price inelasticity, right? Perfectly inelastic. If I change the price, I'm not necessarily going to sell one item more or one item less. So that would be up and down. Okay, straight up and down to be perfect. Right? Now, in those cases, in the extreme cases, the graphs are relatively logical. When we looked at the graphs, they were logical to a point, whether you would look at them as to whether they were steeper or flatter. Right? But you got to be careful because elasticity isn't how steep the curve is per se. It is the relative, the percentage change. It's not rise over run, it's not the slope. It's the percentage change in rise over the percentage change in run. Okay? And your eyes don't do that perception. The graphs don't do that perception. they generally will show you just the rise over the run, not the percentage change. And it's really the percentage change that is the elastic or inelastic. All right. So, anyways, so this chapter I think is a little bit complicated, and I don't want you to walk away from this chapter thinking that it was easier than you thought it was going to be, because you have that a little bit that difficulty. I kind of wish the book wouldn't have spent as much time on the graphs in this chapter because of what I just mentioned. But anyways, it did. All right, so I just want to put that in play. The other thing, when we go into chapter 6, we talk about the government actions. Okay, and when a government interferes with a marketplace, okay, either directly by making laws that say there is a minimum amount or a maximum amount, okay, that you can charge. At that point, one of two things will happen, okay? Either the government edict as to what the minimum price is or the maximum price would be irrelevant, because nobody was going to be, they weren't going to be binding anyways. If they're not going to be binding, okay, then regular supply and demand works, right? For instance, if I made a law that said in the state of Texas, you cannot pay anybody less than a penny and a half per hour, okay, it doesn't matter, because there's absolutely, the equilibrium is not going to be at the penny per hour basis. It's going to be where supply equals demand is going to be much higher. And in the current market, okay, with interest rates going up, we have an unemployment rate that is very, very low, which basically means people who want a job can get a job, okay, and the equilibrium pay is going to be a lot more than a penny an hour, right? So in that case, if the government made such a law, it wouldn't matter because it's not binding. If the government made a law in terms of the maximum price and made it an argument that a firm could not be charging you or not pay you more than $6,000 an hour, doesn't matter, because essentially it's irrelevant, okay? Where supply equals demand is closer to reality, right? It's not way up here. So saying that's the maximum, well, if the government makes an action like that, it's not binding. It's not a binding constraint, so we can ignore it. Where we do run into problems is where there are binding constraints, where the equilibrium would not be allowed under the governmental guidelines. At that point, we have high or we have low, right? And, we're either higher or lower. If we're not allowed to be at an equilibrium, what is the closest that we can get? Okay. In that case, we will have buyers of the product that can't get goods in one case, or we will have sellers of a product that can't find buyers. Normally, they would adjust in price until we get to the equilibrium, and we can't get there. Right. The other part of this chapter talked about taxes, right? If the government wants to collect taxes and it charges a price for people, okay, it interferes, it moves the supply and or the demand curve, depending on whether the government is charging the seller or charging the buyer. Okay. If they're charging the seller, what we're going to see is that the prices increase and things, you know, and you know, the seller will increase the price. After they pay the taxes, they will actually get a little bit less than they started with. If it's the buyers that get taxed, like in a sales tax type of an environment, okay, the buyer will get a lower price, but the buyer has to pay a tax. So the buyer ends up paying a little bit more, and the merchant will end up getting, well, the merchant isn't necessarily affected, but they'll be affected because the supply and demand has shifted. So here we are talking about the shift in either the supply, if it is a tax that is paid by the merchant, or a shift in the demand if it is a tax that is applied to the buyer. Slightly different in each case, right? So, you know, one of the things we need to just learn is a little bit of how to move things around. Okay. Other governmental actions may influence both the supply and the demand curve. Okay. Now, part of an economist would say, oh, ideally we wouldn't want the government to interfere in any of this. Yeah. Really? Okay. Sometimes we do. Sometimes if there's a natural disaster, we don't look very kindly upon people who are taking advantage of people, right? If we have a situation such as in the earthquake in Turkey right now, it would be somewhat unconscionable to let food prices be such that only the wealthy will be able to survive and not the poor survivors who have lost their homes and everything else and all of their wealth in terms of that. We may want to have governmental action to make things fair, right? So there are reasons why we would want to do that. Well, if the government is trying to raise taxes, well, as an economist, it's a necessary evil, right? We want the government to do things like build roads and pay for the military and so on and so forth. And that money has to come from somewhere, right? So to the extent that they charge taxes on transactions, it is somewhat of a necessary evil, right? Anyways, those are the main things. I appreciate people commenting on both the questions that were out on Blackboard. I saw a lot of comments on the elasticity of eggs, and as I expected, almost all of you indicated that your demand for eggs was pretty inelastic, right? At least at these price levels. That as the prices change, you're not changing your breakfast habits because the egg prices went from $4 a dozen, to $5 a dozen, or possibly down to $3. Okay. The question I just asked a few seconds ago on the discussion board is we're getting to Easter season. Now, depending on where you are in the country, I know down here, people like to put confetti in emptied Easter colored eggs, and then hit people over the head with them and make the confetti go all the way around and so on and so forth. And that's a lot of fun. In some other parts of the country, we are more likely to color the eggs and have the children go and search for them in the yard or wherever. in the house, hopefully finding them after they're colored, and how that celebrates what Easter is supposed to be, I haven't figured out yet. You know, ask your priest or your religious person as to why this tradition makes any kind of theological sense, because I don't understand it. But nevertheless, it is one. Now, my question to you, if you've got a family and it's coming to Easter and it's time to buy Easter eggs, now the question is, are you price sensitive? Okay. If the price is high, are you more likely to buy less eggs? If the price is low, might you buy an extra dozen or so? And if so, yeah, are you more elastic than you were when you answered this question in early February? Okay? Early February, most of you are pretty inelastic in your demands. Okay? It wouldn't surprise me if some of you guys are pretty elastic when it comes to buying eggs that you're going to color for the purpose of celebrating Easter. Anyways, I hope you've enjoyed this section. We will put a test on Module B out on the website. It should be available for you later on this afternoon. Anyways, I look forward to talking with you soon and introducing you to Module C. Thank you. Bye-bye.